Today's topic we want to talk about is a use case around the IAM part. And so when we talk about IAM, there are already plenty of tutorials available, like writing an IAM policy, how to get it tested, and how to map it, role, and stuff. But the main use case we want to talk today is, which many industry people face it, like when they onboard the AWS account, they want to do like ad hoc level. So they provide access. They don't want to keep IAM as the blocker part. And then slowly they realize like, hey, did I give too much of access to the team? And it might be the developers having a direct edit access to the resource via UI. So, for example, let's say a scenario like you have a user and you provide access to all the resources like uh, S3, EC2, Bedrock, and then they end up in a situation where they are not aware like who is using what, and it can literally like break things if you touch any of the existing IAM role, and that too in terms of like business critical applications. If you're stopping it, there should not be no downtime impact, right? So the generic preference in industry is that, okay, we made a thing in terms of like providing multiple access or like over open access to the team. How can we identify who is using what, and how can I granularize for a specific user to limit from this specific state into, let's say, the user is using only S3 as part of the daily task, so that I can go ahead and provide a access to the user only with S3, and I can get rid of access from EC2 and Bedrock. And there can be also scenario like where you keep adding more user and you are not aware like who is active, who is no more in use of the AWS console part. This can be a very tricky scenario, like we are touching a production one, and we also don't need to have any downtime part of it. So how we can we achieve this? So the generic steps can be done in three ways. One, first step you would do is see the unused resource or unused roles, so that we can easily start with cleaning up. So if someone is not using it, then it would be easy to clean up. For example, you have an user Vasan who's having admin permission, let's say, but the person is not doing any activity related to S3 or EC2 or Bedrock. Then you can start framing up with the custom policy for what the user is using by eliminating or trimming it out what the person is not using. So that would be the first step. The second step, we can also check in terms of who did the login, who has actively been communicating with the access keys or via the console, what service they're using. So we can try to see who's been logged in, and then we can try to use the cleanup of the user part. The third thing would be, once we have the data about what are the unused assets, what are the unused user accounts, then we can go in terms of granularizing the IAM policy itself. So when we talk about granularizing IAM policy, again, we can't directly touch the production systems because it can be tricky. So what happens if I remove a specific policy by mistake and then the user gets blocked? Or if it is a role assumed by an EC2 instance, which is handling the production activity, what if the workflow gets broken due to the IAM role stuff? So we are going to test it before implementing it in the production world. And again, we can't create multiple test users just for the specific purpose. How can we test as a user, a resource to who is assuming the specific policy and ensure, and also how we can versioning, right? Because we also need to think in terms of quick fallback. In case if you implement a task and then you think something goes wrong or crazy and then you want to do a quick rollback, how can you do that? So these three things we are going to see it in today's session, like identifying the unused access, the logging pattern, and the granularizing the existing IAM policy. To begin with, to see the unused access or to see like what developers are using and what developers are not using. So AWS provides a service called Access Analyzer. If you go into the IAM service into the console, at the left side of the screen, you see like access reports. There you can see something called unused access. It's not a free one; it's a paid service. They, if you see about pricing, so they charge you like per policy or per role to evaluate. So if you see like total users plus total roles, they're going to combine, and per role or per user, they're going to cost you of 0.20 cents, and it's per month basis, right? So they are going to keep on doing it. So if it's a one-time activity, try to do it once and then try to decommission your analyzer which you implemented. So in most of the organization, it will be like one-time activity. So they try to get the report and then they fine-tune it, granularize it, get into a better shape, and then they move further on that. So in order to speed up the process, I already created the analyzer. If you go into the account, it will be generally like create analyzer at the top right, and now you can see the findings of it, like what are all the unused assets, right? So you can see like finding type as unused permissions and unused role. If there's a role which is not assumed by any of the resource, then you can go and clean up the specific role. One thing. Also, you can see about unused permission, which means specific permission is being provided, and that specific permission is not being used by the resource which has been mapped to. So in this case, there is a two actions being provided, which is of the CloudWatch logs and S3. And if you see, this has been mapped into a specific role of Lambda, and that specific Lambda is not even using it. And you can also see like when is the last used, right? So when you're implementing in terms of cutoff date, like to decommission the specific role or policy, you can say like, okay, if there is no use for last 90 days or 180 days, it's safer to do it, right? So by which you can come up with a conclusion. Same if we go more deep into it. So we saw about the role and then a specific permission of a role. You also see about the user itself, right? So you see like I created a user and the password itself has been never used. And you can go more deep into it about like each components, either by role or user or the unused specific policy itself. So this can help you in terms of filtering it out, like what role level granularity or what the policy level granularity you can bring in, and you can plan for an account level cleanup going further on that. Again, if you go into the analyzer settings, uh, you can also delegate your specific one. So for example, there are organization units. If you are most of the companies would use a control tower setup. We also made a separate session on that of control tower, how to combine it with the organization unit. So if you have a specific setup like that, having an organization unit and you want to centralize the evaluate rather than creating an access analyzer at account level and do that, you can delegate to a specific OU. You need to provide the organization ID so that any accounts that are mapped under the specific OU will be get analyzed, and then you would get a specific findings for the entire accounts within the organization level part. So this is one step you can do in terms of to identify who is using what and what level of granularity you can further scope it down. The next step would be of identifying the users, right, who logged in and who haven't logged in, or when they use the lodge credentials, when they are moved the rotated the access keys at the latest part. So to do that, again under the same access analyzer, you would see something called credential report. If you go deep into it, you can see download credentials report, download it. So if you just do that, it provides you the clear detail around that, like what is the username, what is the ARN of the user, and when it is created. Generally, give a specific details like when is the password is enabled, when it is last used, when it is recently changed. All the details you can fetch it out. So you can play with generating a report who is not active or who never the inactive access keys to decommission. So all those kind of activities you can plan in term when it comes to cleanup of the IAM user part. So generally you have two things now. So one in terms of fetching the unused access details, and then you also got the credentials report of users who recently logged in and who are not that much active in the uh, current login part, right? So either you can go into like each individual's roles policy and then say that okay, so this is the one, this people is not using the specific XYZ access, so I'm going to fine tune it. So that's one way of doing it. Or if your account is structured in a way, so in most of the organization structure will be something like they will be having a root account or a root OU, and within the root OU they will be having like multiple child OUs. For example, one for developer, one for a data team, one for security team or site reliability team. So what you can try to do is, okay, so this specific XYZ action being never performed by the specific team at all, and these teams generally will be mapping the team with the active directory, and then you would say like okay, this specific active directory provide access to the OU level of let's say data team, right? So if the data team is no more using services like IAM or EC2 instance, for example, but they've been provided access to that. So rather going and playing with the data team IAM role or policy, you can consider applying a service control policy we have, which you can apply at the organization level. So that can act as a upper layer protection for people to stop accessing it. So it's up to individual wise, like if the entire account is clumsy, there are like n number of roles and number of policies, and if you want to do like minimal risk, you can just create a simple service control policy with an action saying that deny to a specific action or specific resource condition, and then map it to the OU part. Again, so that can be done over here. The service control policies, you can create it, and then you can attach it to the specific organization unit part. One thing you want to keep in mind is this access analysis is not free. So for me, they charged around like $15 when I was performing the specific activity. Be in mind of enabling the access analyzer and playing with it. Hope you got the idea about how we can fetch the details of getting the unused access and then the unused login part. And now let's talk about the granularizing. Let's say if you decided to granularize the specific user access, the policy map to it. What offers is something called the policy simulator. I can again share the link in the description or as part of the group. If you go to the IAM policy simulator, you can choose which account you want to test it on. For example, in this account, we have multiple users. Let's say go with Vasan. Then I have the admin permission over there. So now I can see either Vasan as a user using this specific IAM policy. Can this user can perform the action of S3 about multiple upload. So if I do a run simulation, you can see the result of it, like whether the action will be get allowed or not. Now the same user Vasan, without the policy which has been mapped, can the user can assess the specific policy. If I again do a run simulation, you can see it's denied thing. So here you have like two policies, one for the user demo underscore 123. The user is having IAM policy change and S3 full. So let's say this user is having a specific policy, but you are not aware like which policy is giving them the specific action of S3, right? So first you can try simulating it giving an allow action, and if I try removing the policy of IAM change use policy, then it gives like it's still allowed. And if I remove this one and with this, now you get a denied. So if you want to narrow down for a specific user what IAM policy is letting them to perform the action, rather going into individual JSON and trying to figure it out like what policy is letting them to do a specific action, you can try exploring this one policy simulator where you can assume a specific user and then try to play a role of what policy is being used. So this is one way of before testing it out. So you can also create a custom policy as a temporary one. Again, do a test like whether that policy is letting it to do or not. So here it already give like existing policy and new policy and more options around there in terms of simulation part. So now we do the user part. We can able to simulate it. Now we would need to touch the existing IAM policy itself, right, to get the what happened. What if we screw it up, or what if I change the policy and then I need to do a quick rollback? There is again something called versioning supported by the AWS native. If you're already using a Terraform or any cloud formation to create the IAM part or IAM automation stuff, then it's doable. But if your organization is restricting, like not to provide access key or role to control the IAM and you want to limit it within as a manual part, so still AWS gets you covered. So if you go for the policies, for example, and choose customer managed policy, let's say I go for, I don't know what it does. So I can edit it, and let's say I want to add a new statement, something around this, and let's say I want to give API gateway policy get. So I'm giving this permission, let's say, and okay, so resource can't be empty. So I need to provide resource. Let's say provide resource as star, and so this has been created. Let's say do a save changes. Now it's going to have a version part of it, right? So whenever I'm implementing a change, it's going to create a new version, and whatever the latest version is going to be the default uh, part. So for example, if I go to the permissions and let's say I want to edit it and I want to remove the specific policy, for instance, I go next and save changes. That is going to be another version created, right? So if you want to do a quick rollback, for example, I remove the existing permission and then users are complaining, you can go here and then do set as default, so that the user who are already aware about or who are using the existing policy either in terms of IAM rules or IAM policies, they can do a quick rollback within a minute, and then you can explore in terms of like what happened at the backend part and try to get this fixed. These are the steps which you can follow in real time to move from the wider open policy into more narrow down granular policy without having any downtime. And even if there is an impact, it should be like very minimal of quick rollback time of like fraction of seconds to a quick rollback. So these are the options generally available. Yes, that's it mostly for today's session planned. Any specific doubts from you? Feel free to ask.